All right, so I told you guys weeks ago now that once we found out that progressives gave up their leverage in the House by voting for the bipartisan infrastructure framework, that Build Back Better was essentially dead. Okay, if you guys remember the basics of this dual track process that it was supposed to go down in terms of passing these two pieces of legislation, that was the red line in the sand that was supposed to be never crossed. Okay, they were supposed to get to Joe Biden's desk at the same time. Now, progressives, the Congressional Progressive Caucus, basically led by Pramila Jayapal, gave up that leverage. Okay, they allowed themselves to be fractured and split, and the bipartisan infrastructure framework ended up getting passed by itself, not attached to the Build Back Better Act. Now, at that point, we were already left with a completely watered down Build Back Better Act. Basically, Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema got everything substantive taken out of it, and I'm going to show you exactly what they got taken out of it, but we were left with a pathetic, hollow bill that is barely an excuse for its former self, and even that was not good enough for Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, and we are now finding out that Democrats are, in fact, pushing Build Back Better, even attempting to pass it until at least 2022, if it ever gets passed at all, which I don't think it is likely to. So you see here from MSNBC News, or just NBC News rather, Democrats' hopes dim that Build Back Better will pass before New Year. And let me tell you something, it is not going to get passed now. It is not going to get passed right after the New Year. Okay, Joe Manchin does not want this shit to pass, and we know that Joe Biden is not going to fight for it, so it's basically dead in the water as it was weeks ago, as everybody who knew what was going on and was following along with this would have been able to tell you. Okay, it's not that I'm some political genius or that I'm a fortune teller. It was just really obvious where the leverage was, and progressives completely gave that up. So this is inevitably what was going to be the result of that situation. But again, just to give a little bit of a recap in terms of what we let get taken out of this bill as a part of these negotiations with completely bad faith corrupt actors like Kyrsten Sinema, Josh Gottenheimer, and Joe Manchin. So what was in the bill? Okay, so basically they did a so-called bipartisan compromise on climate change. Well, let's just read a little bit about the pathetic climate change portion that was left within this $1.75 trillion version. So they said, climate, the proposed framework contains over $550 billion to tackle the climate crisis. Again, this is a bill that is supposed to be stretched over 8 to 10 years, okay? We spend more than this in 1 year on our military, and this is supposedly going to tackle climate change, the greatest threat facing humanity, but $550 billion to tackle the climate crisis, down from an initial proposal of $600 billion, and instead of imposing fines for electric utility companies that don't switch from fossil fuels to renewable or clean energy sources, an approach that was opposed by, guess who, the oil baron, the millionaire coal baron, Joe Manchin from West Virginia. And the climate portion of the bill relies heavily on providing $320 billion in expanded clean energy credits. So you basically see what they are doing. Instead of going after the centers of capital, this time in the fossil fuel industry, instead of imposing fines on them and punishing them for destroying the planet, they are instead going to try to mildly incentivize them to do the right thing. Again, all of this is basically a moot point because the entire bill is dead at this point, but you see how compromise is never good enough, even for guys like Joe Manchin. So Medicare benefits, again, they took out the major portions of this. I think they left in hearing, but they took out dental and vision, which were some of the most popular portions of the bill. They also completely took out paid family leave, something that every other country on earth, essentially outside of us and like 2 others, have as a guaranteed right for their citizens. We don't have anything, and they took that out of the bill. Couldn't even get that past Joe Manchin. Free community college, again, would have only cost $109 billion. That's roughly like, what, $10-11 billion a year. Again, a tiny fraction of what we spend on completely perverse things like the military, but even that could not get passed. Dental and vision, again, taken out. Lower prescription drug prices, the single most important and popular part of the bill, that got completely scrapped. What's the same, or it didn't get completely scrapped, but now they're supposedly going to be negotiating like 10 drugs, and it'll only start happening after 2025, after Republicans can undo it. So lower prescription drug prices taken out. What's the same? Universal pre-K. I covered on this channel multiple times. It's not actually universal. In fact, it's nowhere close to being universal. Child and earned income tax credits. Joe Manchin, as we're going to get to, just came out opposed to the child tax credits. So this is not even going to be the same as they're saying. So basically, you guys get the point, okay? This bill was completely eviscerated, completely gutted at the behest of a very tiny minority, a handful of corrupt members within the Democratic Party, and they basically got everything that they wanted, and that still is not enough, and the bill is essentially dead in the water. And you see here Joe Manchin literally laughing at the idea of passing this current pathetic watered down version of the bill. New here from Jake Sherman, Manchin just told a small group of us he spoke to Biden today, not much else on timeline. Manu Raju asked him if Biden is moving closer to what he's asking for. Manchin laughed and said, I wouldn't say that. Okay, so again, This is just a lesson. Even when you give these corrupt motherfuckers every single goddamn thing that they are asking for, it will not be enough, okay? They will bring up bullshit inflation numbers that have absolutely nothing to do with stimulus to working class Americans. They will bring up the national debt and everything that they never bring up when it comes to tax breaks for billionaires or for the military budget. So you see the hypocrisy. They are completely unserious, corrupt people. They are not negotiating in good faith, and it will never be enough. Joe Manchin will continue to spit and laugh in Joe Biden's face until the end of his presidency, and that is going to be pretty soon, considering that this presidency is completely pathetic and is set to get completely obliterated by whoever runs in 2024 on the Republican ticket, likely to be Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis or one of those other motherfuckers. But just to give you a recap in terms of how progressives fucked this entire situation up, okay? So basically, it comes down to Pramila Jayapal, okay? Because there were some members of the squad who ended up voting against the bipartisan infrastructure framework as they were trying to detach the two bills and let the bipartisan one sail through without it being attached to the Build Back Better Act, basically. But Pramila Jayapal, the leader of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, the entire leverage that progressives had in this situation was a unified Congressional Progressive Caucus that was willing to stand together as a voting bloc. And keep in mind, we are talking about two senators in the Senate, and Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, who were opposed to the $3.5 trillion number. We had 9 or 12 corporate Democrats within the House that were opposed to the $3.5 trillion number. And meanwhile, there are 100 members within the Congressional Progressive Caucus. So we are literally talking about a fight between, the vast majority of the Democratic caucus, especially the Congressional Progressive Caucus, versus a tiny handful, maybe a dozen corporate Democrats. So they had the numbers advantage, okay? All they had to do was keep the Congressional Progressive Caucus unified and say, we are not going to vote for the bipartisan infrastructure framework unless both of these bills are going to get to Biden's desk at the same time, which was the plan throughout this entire negotiation process. Now, Pramila Jayapal completely abandoned that plan at the trust of Joe Biden to get Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema to fall in line on Build Back Better in the Senate. Okay, so just to give you a perspective here, you see the Situation Room from November 8th, Representative Pramila Jayapal on whether she has faith that her moderate Democratic colleagues will vote for the social spending bill. We started to rebuild some of the trust. They committed in writing to doing the voting for the Build Back Better Act in about 10 days. So in this, she was specifically talking about the House members who were going to vote for this. Now, they did end up doing that, okay? But that's not the entire situation, and she knows that, okay? It doesn't just have to get out of the House. If these corrupt corporate Democrats within the House, they might be willing to vote for it, knowing that it's about to go die in the Senate, and that's exactly what fucking happened. And we said this at the time, so I know that she understood that situation, and it's not as if it was a secret thing, okay? Joe Manchin, Kyrsten Sinema, as Pramila Jayapal was coming out and saying this, they were openly saying, we are not going to vote for the Build Back Better Act as it stands right now. So from that position, she knew in her head, either they are going to significantly cut it back until it's even more unrecognizable from its current form, or they are just going to block it entirely. So she knew that at the time, and she still came out and said some shit like this. And then also, in addition to that, she just said, we're going to trust the president on the Senate vote, and we're going to trust our Senate colleagues, all of them, all 50 of them, on the Senate vote. Well, look what the fuck that trust got you. Why would you ever trust Joe Manchin or Joe Biden or Kyrsten Sinema at face value to fight for progressive agenda items? That is nonsense. That is delusional, okay? It's not just delusional, it's pathetic that you would even for a millisecond put your trust and faith in these people who have proven time and time again that when it comes down to it, they are not willing to fight for absolutely anything. Joe Biden did not even come into this fight on his agenda, okay? Keep in mind, the $3.5 trillion number, that was Joe Biden's agenda. That was not Bernie Sanders' agenda. Bernie wanted initially $6 trillion, okay? The $3.5 trillion number, that was Biden's agenda. That was already the compromise. And then Joe Manchin, Kyrsten Sinema, Josh Gottenheimer, the rest of these corporate motherfuckers, they come in, make completely ridiculous demands to gut the bill and take out the most popular, the most important pieces of that bill, just purely on behalf of their corporate donors, okay? We know, for example, in West Virginia, Joe Manchin's constituency, or in Arizona with Kyrsten Sinema's constituency, they overwhelmingly support the policies that those two motherfuckers got taken out of the bill. So it's not as if you're having to negotiate with centrists who are actually just representing their constituents. No, you were negotiating with corrupt politicians, okay? They were not acting in good faith throughout the entire process. So why for even a second would you believe or trust them at face value? It's just, it's beyond ridiculous. It's beyond absurd, but it shows you that either she doesn't know what she's doing as the leader of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, or she's just bad at it. She just doesn't understand the situation, okay? And I really don't even believe that. I don't believe that somebody somebody as smart as Pramila Jayapal would not understand that dynamic. So either she's being dishonest, or I don't know what else explains it other than those two things, not understanding it or actively being dishonest, because she knew the situation that I just described, and she still chose to put her trust in somebody who proved time and time again he's not willing to fight for his own agenda. Okay, so don't know why you would ever think that. And again, even on these specific policies, okay, so even in the completely gutted, the completely watered down version of the $1.75 trillion Build Back Better Act, one of the most popular things that was within this, that has been basically the most popular thing under the Joe Biden administration other than the stimulus checks, is the child tax credit. Okay, now Joe Manchin is coming out and saying he opposes the child tax credit. He doesn't want it extended. So the child tax credit, okay, which Democrats went out, they did a victory lap, they went out advertising to the American people. This child tax credit will cut child poverty in this country in half, okay? That's what they were coming out and claiming. Now, they're going to get rid of it. Now, Joe Biden is going to let the child tax credit, which apparently cut child poverty in half, he's going to let it expire, plunging more people into poverty and despair. What the fuck are you doing, man? Okay, again, this is why sometimes I think in my head, like, are they seriously just trying to lose? Are they actively trying to self-sabotage here? Because not only from like an economic perspective, but also a political perspective, from a humanitarian perspective, you just claimed that this specific policy was slashing child poverty by like massive amounts, and then you're just gonna let one motherfucker cut it from your bill to not pass this bill? That's absolutely insane. And they're not only doing that, they're actually gonna be slapping people with more bills coming up in 2022 in an election year. Federal student loan payments, I covered this just the other day, will resume in February after Biden lifts its pause. So listen, this is just a completely absurd situation. Again, it's like Democrats are trying to sabotage themselves for 2022, okay? None of this makes political sense. None of it makes economic sense. None of it makes sense from literally any angle unless your entire priority is just serving the interests of whatever the fuck Joe Manchin or Kirsten Sinema or Josh Gottenheimer want, okay? You're serving the interests of their donors, which just so happen to coincide with many of Joe Biden's donors himself. So I wonder why he's not willing to put up a serious fight. But listen, this was just an absolute shit show throughout this entire process. From the beginning, with the Congressional Progressive Caucus allowing them to separate these two bills in the first place, then allowing themselves to be backed into the corner, even though they had the overwhelming majority of the people on their side and also the overwhelming majority of even the politicians on their side, and that you would still lose this fight. It's top to bottom just completely pathetic. This negotiation process has destroyed my faith in the progressives in the House and Senate, in their ability to do literally anything, because you had everything. You had all of the leverage, and you gave it up based on trusting Joe Biden to fight for his agenda. It's just completely delusional.